SPIRE Sessions is the second part of a two-part session on Sustainable Development Goals. In Part 1, SPIRE CEO Leon Perera and Sustainability Consultant Nitesh Dullabh discussed the role of UN-developed sustainability goals for companies. In this session, they will talk about how companies can fit Sustainable Development Goals into their corporate mission.
Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for this second edition of SPIRE Sessions with my friend Nitesh Dullabh. And in the first edition of SPIRE Sessions, when we had Nitesh as our guest, he talked to us about his background. Nitesh was a member of Nelson Mandela's government in the 1990s when South Africa went through a huge change. And as part of that team, which is widely admired across the world, he talked about how he helped to make contributions to grow South Africa's economy through foreign direct investment, promotion of overseas investment by South African companies, but in a sustainable way. And that drew him into the whole space of sustainable development goals and how companies can do better by doing good. So for this second edition of SPIRE Sessions, we're very glad to have Nitesh back with us again. Thanks, Nitesh, for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good to be back, and thank you for inviting me again.
Right, Nitesh, so perhaps I can get the ball rolling by asking you to give us an overview of Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, what are these SDGs? I'm sure there's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot of information about attending to different dimensions of sustainability and inclusiveness. But from the perspective of companies, I mean, what should companies really know about these SDGs? What are the key points and the kind of key takeaways that companies should need to know about what these SDGs are?
Great. Leon, thank you for having me again, and it's good to see you too. So in answer to your question, the SDGs are basically a framework for understanding how we can do sustainability better in our world. And it actually provides a framework both for government, for business, NGO sector, in terms of how can we move our world into a better environment, specifically looking at climate change issues. And the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, provide a framework for me, especially in terms of how we're looking at the world from an environmental, economic, social, and governance lens. And these particular SDGs, I think, have been profound for me, especially when I work with companies in them, because it has provided, I would say, the very heart or the essence of how companies need to do business. So in essence, there are 16 SDGs. And I say that because SDG 17 talks about partnerships. And it is only through those partnerships that a variety of the work that we want to get involved in with regard to sustainable value and sustainable projects, it is only then that these initiatives can basically get off the ground. So for the SDGs to work, I think we need to have an understanding that from an environmental perspective, there are specific areas that the SDGs have given us a focus to work on. So SDG 13 looking specifically at climate change, SDG 6 looking at water, and SDG 7 looking at energy, for example. Then we have, for example, on social issues, where we look at SDG 5, look at gender diversity. Those are important issues that we're dealing with here at the moment, But then we also need to understand that peace, justice, and social institution, SDG 16, is an important one as well, because we want to work in an environment where there is transparency, there is accountability. And this is what the SDGs brings as well, is that you need to do your work, but do it in a transparent and an honest manner.
It's great that you talked about that, because a lot of people think that Sustainable Development Goals are just all about being green, and that's obviously very important. Carbon emissions, and then you also mentioned energy conservation, and there has been a move by many governments to nudge companies to conserve energy and then also water is relevant to that. But also going beyond that, I mean, you have things like gender diversity, inclusiveness, fairness, transparency in the corporate process. I think in the first edition of SPIRE Sessions, we talked about how in some countries in the world, societies have recognized for some time that companies need to be accountable to more than just shareholders. In some European countries, you have a supervisory board that sits on top of the main board of directors, and that supervisory board will have workers' representatives or union representatives, and look at accountability to other kinds of stakeholder communities. So it's really useful that you talk about how multidimensional these SDGs are. When we have this conversation about companies wanting to do well by doing good, companies doing corporate social responsibility, companies respecting the UN SDGs, there will always be certain voices that say that this is, for want of a better term, greenwashing. Some people point out how the departments within companies that are looking at SDGs and CSR are sometimes parked under the marketing department, and really is the commitment to SDGs sometimes just lip service or window dressing. So some companies, I think, have come under a certain amount of criticism by activists and other communities about whether they're seriously committed to these kind of SDGs. So that's probably a pitfall when companies start on this journey. And what do you think about that, Nitesh? How can companies really avoid that sort of perception of lip service?
I think you raised an important point there, Leon, because in my understanding, what I found is that there is sometimes a confusion in terms of understanding the goals of the UN Sustainable Goals or the UN SDGs and compare that to your corporate social responsibility program. So I think for me, we need to make a distinction that your sustainability plan is not your philanthropic plan. They should be kept separate. Your philanthropic plan is where you do good through your foundation, for example. Right. Whereas the UN SDGs is your company sustainability plan in terms of what is it that you are doing, for example, to reduce carbon emissions. What is the plan? What is the program? What is the strategy that you have in place to reduce water consumption, for example, or looking at alternative water consumption, like maybe water reuse, for example, or water recycling, for example. Do you have, for example, a key performance indicator or a target that you have on that particular project? So, for example, if you are a large manufacturing company, right? Is there a plan, or firstly, is there a strategy in place in which you are reducing scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions? Is there a plan in terms of how you are reducing any waste within the business, through a circular thinking type of mentality? But more importantly, also from a social perspective, what is it that you're doing to increase gender diversity, inclusion within the business as well? So I think there's a variety of issues that companies need to think about. But for me, it's about starting with a strategy. A company needs to start with a strategy. But in some cases, Leon, I think sometimes you need to go a step even back, in the sense that you need to understand what is your company purpose. And based on your purpose and your mission, I strongly believe that your sustainability plan or your sustainability strategy needs to align with your company mission.
Absolutely. I mean, thanks, Nitesh, for making that point. And I think, to maybe distill some of what you're saying that the commitment to SDGs has to be deeply woven to the fabric of the company. It should involve some, introspection, some reflection about what the mission statement of the company should be. It should not just be window dressing overlaid on top of what the company is basically doing to maximize profits, but it should be woven into that mission statement, and it should have the full mandate of the company leadership, and there should be a lot of clarity about what this commits the company to, rather than just being kind of something that is an afterthought. So that's a hugely important point, Nitesh. And I think that is a good lead into the next question I have. It's a very key question, which is, how should companies go about, building SDGs into their mission, into their corporate process, into their operations? I mean, what are some of the key things that they should focus on? I mean, you've worked with companies to help them to do this. You've helped to create roadmaps and operational plans for companies in this regard. So what are really the things that companies should focus on to get this going?
Yeah, Leon, I think the first thing is awareness and education. And unfortunately, there is a lack of this in some cases. And, my belief is that it starts at the board level, in my opinion. I think, boards need to take more of an active role in terms of how they are seeing sustainability. I think gone are the days where sustainability sits within the audit or risk function. It needs to stand on its own. It needs to have its own steering committee, I think. And I think it starts there. And then it needs to go onto a CEO management level as well. But in saying this, Leon, I think sustainability needs to be an inclusive process throughout the whole organization. And what I have found in working with organizations is that you have to start with doing a quick review of the company in terms of where you are now and where you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, but also looking at that vision with a very strong sustainability lens. I think the next part then is doing a materiality assessment. And that materiality assessment would be like, what are the important sustainability factors that are important that will have an impact to the business in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? It's important to understand what are those important factors. I think the next step is then having an understanding of the SDGs. And I'm just going through sort of a roadmap process with you, Leon. The next step is actually having an understanding of which of those SDGs are important to you as a company. Because there are 17, there are many. So the company has to go, I think, through a prioritization process and to say, which of those 17 SDGs appeals to me and where can I make the most impact based on those SDGs, right? So I think
some companies may generate more waste or be very water intensive. So that prioritization will be different depending on your industry.
Correct. It will depend on your industry, but also the type of impact that you want to make. I think it'll be important to do that. And in many cases, what I have found is that by doing a simple risk opportunity matrix and looking at each of those SDGs and looking at where you can extract the most value, and value in terms of what is it that you're doing for the company, but also value in terms of the people in the organization.
Thanks for that. I think that's that's incredibly,
Yeah. What I have found, Leon, also is that it's an important thing to have these strategies in place, but the implementation part is where companies are lacking. That is why there needs to be robust monitoring. There needs to be accountability, but there needs to be constant, I would say, transparency on the process as well.
So I think that is, as you rightly say, where a lot of companies fall short. I mean, it's very easy to publish a plan and a program, but then, are you measuring the results? Are you holding yourself accountable in a very public way, very kind of transparent way? Like, there are examples, certainly in Asia, where some stock exchanges require some sort of sustainability report, but that report could very well be a sort of a PR type of report that isn't very transparent at all and isn't really measuring certain consistent metrics, over time. So that that is really important to show seriousness and commitment and to have credibility. In our process. And I guess that's really where companies that provide consulting in this area can play a role to help to design, the framework and help to monitor that and provide some independent perspective in that monitoring. as well.
Correct.
And we're sort of running out of time a little bit, Nitesh, but I do want to ask you one last question that is quite important. I mean, in your work, I mean, you've worked with a lot of companies, international companies, to get SDGs woven into their mission and operations. What do you think are some good examples that come to mind that people can think about, as they embark on this path?
Sure, Leon. I think there are quite a few companies out there that are doing a good job. The one that comes to mind immediately is Unilever, for example. I mean, they've done an extremely great job in terms of working through their plan, but more importantly, showing incredible value in terms of how sustainability has worked for them in the last 15 to 20 years, and how they've made the necessary changes in making sure that their products are more eco-friendly, that their people are living and working in healthy environments, and that their supply chains are becoming more transparent and more accountable as well. And I really love the work that they've done over the last number of years. But even if you look industry-wide, there are companies or there are industries out there, like the fashion industry, for example, has now been doing some very interesting work, for example, here in the US, whereby through traceability, they are going to the source of the material. And they are showing accountability in terms of where is that cotton coming from, how much water goes into the manufacture of that particular cotton, and then going through a supply chain type of process in terms of understanding sustainability better. So I think different companies are doing it differently, but I think the supply chain process is becoming more and more important because they are now looking at very strong economic and social values that are important or prominent in that particular supply chain.
Thanks for sharing those examples. I mean, you brought up supply chain traceability, and we've seen quite a lot of interest in that, and we worked with some of our clients to really look at how you bring that about, in a robust manner. So I think we're out of time, but I do want to wrap up by saying that we in SPIRE Research and Consulting looking forward to working together with Nitesh and with corporate clients who are interested to really sit down and have a look at SDGs in a more thorough fashion, to work out roadmaps, strategies, monitoring mechanisms, to really set down the path of weaving these SDGs into corporate mission, corporate operations, and getting ahead of the curve of public opinion, getting ahead of the curve of government regulations, and doing some of these things before you're forced to do some of these things, being seen as a leader rather than a follower. So we really welcome more partnerships with clients that are interested to work with us to embark on this path. So with that, I think we've run out of time. I really want to thank you, Nitesh, for joining us for this second edition of SPIRE Sessions. Thanks so much, and wishing all of you, a good day ahead.
Thanks, Leon. Thanks again, and you have a good day too. All the best, eh?
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.